Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing some of the incredible work being carried out by Magen and Adom in saving lives in Israel and how Christians are making a difference within this organisation. Warm welcome to the programme, and my guest today is Reverend Mark Madeley from Christian Friends of Magen and Adom, and also Barbara Dingle from Christian Friends of Magen and Adom. So both of you, welcome to the Middle East Report.
Thank you.
I'll start off with you, Mark, because we did a programme, I think, last year on the 70th anniversary of the Hadassah massacre. Can you share with our viewers the wonderful response that you received from them in response to the programme that we recorded last year? Because, you know, as far as an organisation is concerned, I'm huge fans of Christian Friends of Magen and Adom and the incredible work that they do in saving lives in Israel.
Yeah, when I was on the programme last time, we were explaining that we were hoping to raise the money for one ambulance for the Hadassah massacre commemoration. But the response to your programme was so great that actually we fulfilled the vision that Barbara and I had to pay for 2 ambulances, which we felt was very significant because there were 2 ambulances lost in the original convoy. And we'd always thought deep down it would be wonderful if we could replace both. And thanks to the viewers of Revelation TV, that is happening.
That's incredible. And, you know, Barbara, you're very much involved in everything to do with Israel and the Jewish community. But what does it mean to you personally to be involved in the work of Christian Friends of Magen and Adom and really showing Christian support to Israel and the Jewish people?
Well, it's a wonderful way to support Israel because it's saving lives. And it's saving lives for all the people of Israel, Jews, Arabs, Bedouin, Druze, tourists, everyone. And so it's a great way to encourage more people to support Israel. We can go into churches that perhaps aren't on board for Israel, but we can talk about life-saving, and no one can have a problem with that.
Excellent. So let's have a look at the work of Christian Friends of Magen and Adom.
Worldwide Christian
Israel today is fulfilling her biblical mandate as a light unto the nations. A leading example of this is the life-saving work of Magen David Adom. It's Israel's ambulance, blood services, and disaster relief organization, providing emergency rescue, paramedic services, and first responders to everyone in Israel, regardless of their faith or ethnicity.
Every man, every woman, every child is made in the image of God. Life is so valuable to God, it should be to us as well. Saving a life is about being our brother's keeper.
It's about choosing life rather than choosing death.
It's prayer in action.
We pray that you will support it and get behind it.
So we want to bless Israel in practical ways, and Magen David Adom is one of those organizations that deserves our support as Christians.
אוטו מחורר מכדורים. בפועל פינו את הילדים ליישוב סמוך. זה לגעת במהות של החיים בעצם באופן יומיומי.
אנחנו נחשפים לאנושות ברגעים הכי קשים שלה, ויש לנו את היכולת לתת יד ולעשות שינוי.
זה מה שאנחנו חיים, זה מה שאנחנו נושמים, וזה מה שאנחנו רואים מול העיניים. ככה אנחנו.
In Israel and internationally, Magen Adom is first on the scene.
We are using the worldwide Christian community to save lives.
We are so happy to be a part of the team that do such a great job to give hope, to give life to people.
Through this van, we feel like we're part of this nation Israel, and I bless every team.
Without the partnership between you and Israel, there would be no future.
But now, such a huge group believes in Israel, believes in our existence here. It's great. Thank you very much.
We just love you, and you are very special.
This evening was amazing, seeing all those people celebrating and supporting the life-giving vehicles that they've provided funds for. Just a wonderful, uniting feeling of Jewish and Christian cooperation.
We just want to thank all of our friends in Singapore and Taiwan and all around the world for blessing Israel, for understanding that this is a responsibility, and by giving to Magen Adom, you are doing that. We are very grateful.
This day means a lot to me because that the Jews walk not alone, that Jewish identity should be strong and high. Hashem Ozli Amo Yitain, Hashem Yivorech et Amo Bashalom.
And if you're looking to support a Christian organisation that stands with Israel, highly recommend Christian Friends of Magen Adom. And Mark, now we have a picture now with yourself and also with Barbara Dingle in a dedication to an ambulance. So if we can go to the picture now on screen, there we go, we can see you both. What is it like, Mark, when you actually then present an ambulance that you've raised through the work of Christian Friends of Magen Adom and you show this to the Israelis?
It brings tears to the eyes, and that's not an over-exaggeration, because we felt right at the beginning that we wanted to put our love into action, and to actually see something physically there in front of us that we feel we have contributed to a good cause in Israel is wonderful. But also, I think, for us spiritually, because we know it is the Lord's land and the Lord's people, you feel a real sense of being involved in God's work. And sometimes, as a minister, you don't actually see what's going on necessarily. You kind of think, is the Lord still active? You go through those dark periods, but when you're there with an ambulance that's actually in front of you, you think, well, that's only here because of the Lord's generosity and the Lord moving people to give. So it's a wonderful moment, practically and spiritually, and I've shed many a tear without embarrassment about doing it.
Amazing.
And I would add, if I may,
of course,
what also is very special, there are a lot of charities and Christian ministries that support Israel. I know I'm involved with quite a few.
Most of them, yeah.
But what is special about donating an ambulance? It says on the side, donated by Christians in the UK. Whereas there are a lot of these other ministries who do wonderful work, and I don't decry that at all, but people in Israel don't always get to hear about it. But when somebody's driving along in the traffic in Tel Aviv and they're next to an ambulance and it says donated by Christians in the UK, people think, wow. And that's special. And when if somebody has a heart attack and an ambulance turns up and they see it's been donated by Christians from the UK, that is very special, and it's a wonderful privilege to be involved with that.
Mark, what's it like to work alongside Magen Adom, which is a Jewish organisation here in the UK that supports the work in Israel because of Israel's security situation and because of Israel's defence spending, Israel can't afford to have its own ambulance service. So this is all funded around the world through private donations, not like our ambulance service, which is provided by our taxpayer through the NHS. So I think we have to make there's a difference. And also the challenges that Israel faces, like no other country in the world. Rockets, missile attacks, terrorist attacks, and yet these brave and courageous MDA ambulance drivers and paramedics have to deal with probably the unthinkable. What they like when you actually meet them in Israel and you meet the paramedics and you see them in action, because I know that you know them personally.
Yes, I've done 3 or 4 shifts now with crews, and they have been incredibly welcoming. They're very, very grateful that we care about them at all. I think, sadly, there are a lot of Israelis still think that Christians don't appreciate them or we're all against them. And so when you go alongside them and say, well, actually, no, you know, we love you, we care for you, we support you, and they see that ambulance there in front of them as well, they're incredibly grateful. And it does give you that real sense of being involved in the Lord's work in a way in which, as Barbara said, is very practical. So I'm a huge, huge fan of Magen David Adom, and I think also working as they have to do sometimes with terrorist incidents, they're remarkably professional. I mean, you hear stories of paramedics who've had to actually go and help the terrorist prior to their own relative because obviously they've triaged the terrorist to be in a worse condition. And to have that sort of dedication and commitment goes well beyond what you might expect of a normal ambulance shift, shall we say. So there's a lot of gratitude for us, and I'm always interested that the moment you say Christian Friends of Magen David Adom, wherever you are in Israel, somebody has heard of you, which is very interesting.
Excellent. And Barbara, can you give a testimony, really, because you work you know, very close to the leadership of the Jewish community, and the Lord's placed you there as for a strategic reason and purpose. What is the response from, say, leaders in the Jewish community when they see the support there is amongst evangelical Christians for Israel, but in particular from Christian Friends of Magen David Adom?
I think they're very appreciative, and they don't take it for granted because, sadly, we often read in the press about different groups, including sometimes even church leaders who come out with anti-Israel statements. So every support for Israel, I would say, is appreciated, and it's a great honour and a blessing to fulfil that role.
Absolutely. Mark, can you share with us the new plans to build the Israeli blood bank and why this is so important? Because when we look at some of the threats that Israel face now, I mean, you only have to look at Israel's northern border with southern Lebanon to actually realise that Hezbollah have amassed something like 100,000 rockets and missiles that are now capable of reaching Jerusalem or reaching Tel Aviv. And, you know, if you are stuck under one of those rockets in one of those high-rise flats in Israel and Tel Aviv, it's very, very frightening prospects. So can you share with us how important this national blood bank is?
It's vital because the current blood bank in Tel HaShomer is above ground, and in one of the recent conflicts that was such a problem that they had to try and move everything underground into effectively a bunker, which meant that the blood resource centre was very, very stretched and people couldn't do their job properly. So there has been this plan for a while to build this new one, which I've actually seen in June. I saw the hole where it's going to be, and I say the hole because they're digging down 3 levels which will be underground and completely bomb-proof, earthquake-proof and everything, so that whatever happens in Israel, they have a blood centre that can continue to function. Otherwise, the blood supply dries up because there just isn't the place to process it.
Absolutely. And Barbara, what's also interesting as well that, you know, the Israelis wouldn't accept British blood because of mad cow disease, but I think that has changed now, and they're now accepting British blood. But how important is it that people give blood?
Well, it's very important, but first of all, it's not an Israeli decision not to accept British blood. It's a World Health Organization ruling. But the great news is that applied to people living in the UK during the 1990s. So anyone who is under, it's about 20 years old now, can now give blood in Israel. And that's a great thing to do. If you're going to Israel and you've got youngsters, probably, I don't know what the minimum age is, but 18, 19, who can give blood, it's a wonderful thing to do. Israel currently needs, I think it's about 260,000 units of blood a year. That's a lot of blood. And there are different components to the blood, the red cells, the white cells, plasma. Some of it only has a shelf life for 5 days. So there's a constant need to always have fresh blood. And of course, during Jewish holidays, people are busy, and the Israeli population isn't always able to give as much blood as required. So it's another way of supporting Israel by giving blood. And for those of us who were here and alive in the UK during the 1990s, let's say you can give virtual blood by supporting Christian Friends of MDA.
Excellent, that's a good plug. And let's have a look now at the work of MDA celebrating Israel's 70th anniversary as a nation reborn.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל.
It's incredible to think that MDA has been around over those past 70 years in which Israel's been re-established as a state. That's quite remarkable, isn't it, Mark? The fact that the MDA is actually older than the modern state of Israel, and how that they've been involved in Israel during 5 major wars during the history, terrorist attacks, and also during the good times as well. And it's almost as if MDA within Israel has become more than a national institution. Can you explain to us that unique relationship between the state and the work of MDA?
Yes, obviously MDA provides a normal ambulance service you would expect for car crashes and so on, but they get stretched every so often with the wars and terrorist accidents, and I think that's why they're so widely respected. And I understand that after the IDF, they're the second most respected organisation in Israel now because of the work that they've done over the years. Clearly, everything's been done through donations and volunteers, and I think that makes it all the more remarkable because you've got Israelis giving up effectively their spare time to serve the state in a way that, you know, in this country, we just know people are paid to do. So that voluntary idea of being there for the community and of actually putting yourself right on the front line, sometimes in very dangerous situations, is why people are so passionate about MDA.
Yeah. And Barbara, something about the Israeli Jewish mentality about wanting to help others and to get involved really does add to the calibre and the incredible work and effectiveness, I would say, of MDA. Can you share with us an example?
Well, I'll say another nice thing, or one of the nice things, as well as being called out to car crashes and accidents and tragedies, of course, sometimes babies come early or unexpectedly, or women in labour are in trouble. And MDA will attend and take the women to hospital, and sometimes the babies are born in the ambulances. And one very nice thing is if a church group or a group of Christians buys an ambulance, or you get an email occasionally, and the headline is The Stork Club. And it will say, your ambulance has delivered a baby, and the baby's name is Moshe, or whatever. That's lovely. Very nice indeed.
Definitely. Yeah, we discussed this earlier, but how does Israel prepare their paramedics? I mean, our paramedics do a fantastic job and, you know, always there when emergencies occur. And maybe last year our paramedics had some sort of experience in dealing with the triple terrorist attacks that we had in London and Manchester, and particularly to think that I think they were delayed for over an hour. The medical services from actually going into the Manchester arena after that horrendous suicide attack. But for the Israelis, this is almost something that they're used to now, sadly. So how do you know MDA prepares their paramedics for the eventuality that they have to deal with possibly a multiple terrorist attack?
From what I understand, they undertake extra training beyond their paramedic degrees. So there is psychological training and so on. And I think then MDA are very careful about ensuring their staff are looked after afterwards. So it's difficult to know exactly because they don't necessarily know when it's going to be and what type of event it's going to be. So if I can just give that general answer of perhaps psychological training and helping them to think through what might happen in the event of a terrorist attack.
I might just add, of course, most Israelis go into the army and they would be trained in the army in skills, paramedic, first aid, all that sort of thing. So army training also provides a level of expertise.
Yeah. I also was impressed with MDA when we've had a few of the paramedics on this programme, and they've been special interviews, is the fact when it comes to a terrorist incident, for example, that they also treat the terrorist as well. Yeah. And on many occasions, that's the last thing you'd want to do. You know, here you are, your fellow Israeli citizens attacked in a terrorist attack, and there you don't discriminate.
You don't, and of course in Judaism, the sanctity of life is very important, so it's key. So when paramedics turn up, as Mark said, it's a sort of triage system. Whoever needs the attention the most is treated first. And if that's a suicide bomber, well, a suicide bomber would be usually killed, but a terrorist, it's in order of priority.
Let's have a look now at how MDA responds to terrorist attacks in Israel.
We have to realize that in this job, not everyone survives. And we take it with us when they don't. People were screaming and shouting, and there was chaos all around.
פיגוע דקירה בירושלים. 3 פיגועים בירושלים.
פיגוע ירי מזעזע.
פיגוע באוטובוס
פיגוע
בירושלים.
פיגוע דריסה קטלנית.
פיגוע בתל אביב.
פיגוע באזור שער.
פיגוע דקירה וירי
קשה
בירושלים.
כמו פיגוע באוטובוס בירושלים.
האש פגעה באוטובוס סמוך שהיה עמוס בנוסעים.
The whole time we were taking care of the patients, I was really scared that someone I know would walk off the bus. This is, you know, I take this bus line all the time. I remember there was this girl, and she looked around my age. Her clothes were burnt, and her hair was burnt, and she was screaming, and she was in a lot of pain. Her image really stuck with me. She was just on her way home and didn't expect this to happen. I remember coming home, my parents knowing that I was at this scene, and my mom was actually in the States on business, so my dad was home, and he just gave me this big hug, and are you okay? How do you feel? And you just don't know what to say. And then the next day I went back to work.
was just total chaos. I've been to a lot of events, but nothing was like this because the attack was spread out over so much distance and everything was really just happening. No one knew where to go or where to even start. So we started with the first person we saw, which was a man about in his 40s, sitting on the sidewalk surrounded by people, bleeding, just an incredible amount of blood. And I noticed it was coming from his right shoulder. And he's sitting there so calmly, and he looks at me and he says, "Don't worry, I hear other people need help. Go to them. I'm fine, I'm fine." And I said, "You're not fine. You know, you need help, you need immediate help." And he said to me, No, the guy just hit me in the back, but it's fine, I'm okay. And then I picked up the corner of his shirt to show him, and his face was he just dropped, and right away we started treating him, getting him into the ambulance. I think about my patients all the time. It's hard. It's a really hard job.
גבר יהודי כבן 40 נדקר בידי צעיר ערבי בן 20.
I saw a man around 40. He was dressed with white shirt and black vest, and the whole shirt and his vest was full of blood, and he was standing in front of my motorcycle. And the second I saw him, he was kind of shocked. He didn't know exactly what happened. And right away I came over to him and I told him, "Tell me what happened, what's going on over here in the scene." He said, "I don't know. I just went to the store over here to buy some drinks and somebody stabbed me." And during that time, I put some band-aids on his cuts and wherever he got wounded. And then the ambulance came and we rushed him into the ambulance and right to the intensive care to take care of him. And the man was stabbed only because he was an Israeli guy that was just walking around, bought some drinks, and only fault that he was an Israeli guy. The ironic thing was that the second that the man was rushed to the hospital and I took all my equipment and I put it into the bag in the back of my motorcycle, I saw the sticker over there, and the sticker over there says that this motorcycle was donated in people of Belgium, the memory of the people who killed at the Jewish Museum in Brussels. At that time, at that second, I felt that you see over here the ability of people to get around the world against the terror. You see people in Europe donated a motorcycle in memory of people who killed in a terror attack. And with that motorcycle, just now I saved life of somebody who just was attacked with a terror attack in Petah Tikva in Israel.
קו 78 קצת אחרי השעה 10 בבוקר בתפר שבין שכונת ארמון הנציב לג'בל מוקבר.
I find myself waking up in the middle of the night after coming to bed, after I kissed all my children, and realizing how much it affects me. One of the scenes which I think affected me the most, we were in a hospital delivering a patient to the hospital's bed, and all of a sudden there came another pager, massive casualty incident, a multiple casualty incident. There was a shooting incident and another shooting incident in two different areas in Jerusalem. I quickly arrived with the intensive care unit to Armon HaNatziv, where we found the bus with the wounded people lying around. And there we had to treat the patients and all the chaos and all the wounded people over there. We had to quickly give them help and aid them. And I'm very happy that we managed to save also over there, again, some few lives also.
I always say that this job is the best one and the worst one, because when you're saving a life, it's the best thing ever, and there is nothing in the world that can replace that feeling. But sometimes you can't save everyone, and the people you didn't save, they walk around with you for a long time.
ההרגשה של הצלת חיים היא סיפוק רב. היא דבר שנותן לי את היכולת לקום מחדש לבוקר נוסף.
It is the most gratifying job, I think, out there.
The opportunity of being able to help people and saving lives in Magen Adom. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm a paramedic.
I will finish a day on the ambulance so happy and so fulfilled that I helped someone, that I did one little thing to make someone else's life a little bit better.
There is a tremendous amount of satisfaction in Magen Adom, and I feel so lucky to be a part of it.
So important that we lift up those very brave and courageous paramedics who serve in MDA in saving lives in Israel. And I mean, what could it be like to actually attend a terrorist incident in Israel? It must be absolutely horrific, and yet they do incredible work. So please keep them in your prayers. And often when we think of Israel, Mark, we often think of the government, we think of the the IDF, but I think also our prayers also need to be directed to the paramedics that are serving Israel, like those brave and courageous testimonies we heard. How important is it that we lift up MDA in prayer?
Vital. I think Scripture tells us we have a duty to give to Israel, whether that's financial or spiritual. And if we're not praying for them, then they're very much out there on their own. And I think what people sometimes forget is it's not just the terror and the attacks they're facing, it's a spiritual battle that goes on in Israel on a daily basis. So if we, as Friends of Israel, are not praying for those people on the front line like MDA, I'd go so far as to say we're actually letting them down.
And Barbara, what's also so remarkable about MDA is the fact is it's very ethnically diverse. You have Jewish Israelis serving, Israeli Arabs serving, you even have Muslims serving as MDA drivers. Doesn't that reflect really the identity of Israel?
It certainly does. We hear so much about the different groups in Israel, and to be in an ambulance where you've got Jews and Arabs together, that says it all. A real partnership, and some of the minority groups as well.
Absolutely.
There's two stories I can give to that. One was when Barbara and I did the dedication for our 4th ambulance in Beersheba down in the Negev desert. There was Jewish people there wearing kippot, but also there was a Muslim lady there wearing a headscarf, and they were just standing side by side serving together, and that is such a powerful thing. And I think we both feel that that resonates with Christians, because obviously Jesus is healing in many different ways through MDA. He's healing physically, he's healing spiritually, he's healing mentally. But one of the most impressive places I've been recently was an ambulance station in Saknin, which is an Arab area, and the ambulance station was given by a Jewish gentleman because he wanted the Arabs to have the same care that Israeli Jews got. So this was some time ago. The area is traditionally anti-Israel, but we were in that station and there were Jewish and Muslim Arabs sitting side by side, and actually it was difficult to tell who was who because of the way they were talking with one another. There were 2 young girls coming out of high school who were both volunteers. One was an Arab Muslim, one was a Jewish girl, and they were best friends, and they become best friends through MDA. They didn't go to school together, but they'd got that common bond of understanding the power of MDA, and it really was bringing people together. It was a marvellous experience.
Absolutely. And Barbara, sadly, Israel gets accused of being an apartheid state, which, as we know, is complete lies. But the demonstration to counter those arguments and lies made against Israel is looking at the work of MDA, isn't it? The fact that
Absolutely.
The fact that you can have an MDA paramedic or ambulance driver who is an Israeli Arab who realises that it's Shabbat, so therefore he says, "I'll take that duty because it's your Shabbat," shows the wonderful service and cooperation there is between Jews and Arabs.
And there have been many instances where sadly there might have been a massacre and Jewish people have been killed, and you will get an Arab MDA paramedic being the first on the scene to look after them, or help the bereaved, and vice versa. Sometimes you have Muslims, Arab people in accidents, and it'll be a Jewish people tending them. And it rather reminds us of the story of the Good Samaritan.
Absolutely. Mark, can you say, I think that's a good point to make actually, this is where Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, and how does that relate to MDA?
It's one of the sermons I do on MDA, actually, is the Good Samaritan, because I think it's very, very powerful. We see in that story, as people will remember, those that are expected to help walk by on the other side, and it's the stranger that comes alongside. Now, I think Israel is very much like the man who's been attacked. It's lying there in need, and people are walking by on the other side not wanting to get involved, when actually Israel is desperate for help. And so I think that we, as Christians, become like the Samaritan, to pick up Israel, to help them and support them at whatever cost, because that is what the Lord told us to do.
Yeah. And Barbara, can you tell us how long you've been involved with the work of Christian Friends of Magen, Adom, and how it's grown over the years?
Yes. I've been working for a Jewish family office. I work for wonderful people since 2004. And they're business people. They invest in a lot of Israeli companies, but they also have a charitable trust. And one of I've got a great job. I write all the checks for this trust. And one of the recipients is Magen David Adom. And I thought way back 2004, wow, isn't this wonderful? These people are giving an ambulance to Israel. Little did I know God's plans. And a few years later, I was in Israel, and I met, I think it was Natalie Blackham at an event, and she was involved with Christian Friends of MDA. And I said, well, I'm in London, I'm already involved with the MDA side. How can I get involved? And then I met up with the work that Mark had already started, and it's grown from there. So over 10 years.
Mark, how does this go down in the Church of England? The fact that not only are you standing up for Israel, but you've probably got an Israeli ambulance parked outside your church.
Yes, depends which part of the Church of England you're in, is the honest answer to that. Needless to say, and I'm appalled by this, there is still a lot of anti-Semitism within the Church of England, and I do come across that. And it annoys me intensely because it can't possibly come out of a true understanding of Scripture. Yet there are other areas of the Church of England, and it is growing surprisingly, where people are seeing, where God's revealing to them, what Israel's about. And so it's pockets of support and rather larger pockets of you're doing the wrong thing. But I'm not going to back down on what Scripture says, whatever anybody tells me. And my own congregation are fantastically supportive of what I do, and that's a great blessing.
And how they learnt about the work of MDA through your sermons and through your passion and love for this organisation?
When I applied to the current post I'm in Weston-super-Mare, I was very honest and said, I've got these interests to do with Israel and I don't want to let them go. And the people interviewing me, including the Archdeacon, said, well, there's no reason you should, because people should have an outside interest besides the parish. So when I arrived, I just began to gently tell them, and the interest grew, and I was invited to speak at various organisations the church has, and things like Harvest Supper, as you would expect, you know, why? So I've been able to build that up over the years. And then obviously each time I've gone out to Israel, I've been open with them. I said, I'm going to Israel because, and then when I've come back, they've said, what happened? Tell us about it, show us some photographs. So the interest is really there. They're really hungry. And I think, you know, from what they've said, they feel privileged in a sense because the Lord's given them someone who knows what's going on in Israel, and I'm able to explain that to them. And then I learn from them too, because as they sort of feed back what they've seen on the BBC, it sharpens our understanding of how we then need to focus on what we're presenting.
Absolutely. And I think also something I can add into this one, Barbara, is the fact that sadly many Christians who are deceived by this doctrine of church replacement theology, and it is a dark, evil deception, because we know that God has a special plan for Israel and the Jewish people. Why else would Israel be mentioned from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, for example? But how does the work of MDA counter a lot of the news reports that many of them will actually see, for example, on our mainstream media news coverage of the conflict? And how does that then enable you to talk about the work of MDA?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, first of all, it demolishes any apartheid argument, because Jews and Arabs, it's treating everyone. As Christians, we know everybody is made in the image of God. So it's wonderful to get out there. MDA helps everybody, whatever religion, race, creed, gender they are. Also, it's a way of going into churches and talking about life-saving, talking about being there in the point of need, as Mark said earlier, like the Good Samaritan. So we can sort of get in away from the political sense of Israel and talk at a humanitarian level.
Yeah. That's good. And Mark, also that, you know, when we look at MDA, we think of paramedics in Israel, but they do more than that, don't they? Can you share with us some of the extraordinary work that MDA do on overseas mission? For example, if there's an earthquake in Haiti or earthquake in Nepal or some sort of like horrendous national disaster that we see that MDA are there, almost one of the first crew on the scene.
I think it's true to say the vast majority of the time they are the first there because they always have an aircraft ready to go to any situation that's needed, including places that don't even recognise Israel's right to exist. And I think when you put that down on the table in front of people and say, have you seen what they're doing in Muslim countries that are opposed to them, then people do sit up and listen. It comes partly out of the fact that sadly Israel's got vast experience of how to deal with these tragedies, but it also comes out of their own humanitarian desire that, as the Jews say, is to save one life is to save the world. And whoever it is, if they need help and Israel can help, they are there within hours. And that is sadly something that's never reported in the media. And I wish it would, because it would give another view on what Israel does.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very important point. And Barbara, I mean, last year this nation faced its own terrorist attacks. Sadly, we saw the Westminster bridge terror attack, we saw the London bridge terror attack, and also the horrendous attack in Manchester, the Manchester Arena. Now, nothing could actually prepare British paramedics to actually deal with those kind of terrorist incidents. So what do you think the lessons that Israel has learnt in dealing with terrorism and how to deal with terrorist attacks that they could teach, say, our own NHS and ambulance staff? Well, I'm sure people in the UK are trained as much as they can be, but as you said, that's the very idea of terror. It's unexpected, it's just horrible. It's very difficult to train for it, but I suppose Israel has, if you can call it an advantage, because it's a country always under attack. As I said earlier, most people go in the army, so they learn a lot from their army skills. And in the UK, people go over to Israel. I know we have the Intelligence and Security Committee in government. They learn a lot from Israel. Israel's a high-tech country, and a lot of medical devices come from Israel. So that the high-tech aspect of the nation, I know in the UK, something like 1/6 of all medications prescribed on the NHS come from Israel. So we learn a lot from this high-tech country. Mark, what do you say are the characteristics that makes up an MDA paramedic?
I think somebody who is geared to saving life at whatever cost and geared to the idea of voluntary service for human benefit, whoever they are treating. Now, a lot of the paramedics are actually paid, although 80+% of MDA volunteers, the paramedics are actually paid, or most of them anyway. But even so, that's dedication to duty of whatever the cost is paramount in their minds. And they're remarkable people, really.
Yeah. Barbara, what's your impression when you've been over to Israel and you've met some of the ambulance drivers, the paramedics, doing incredible work in saving lives in Israel with MDA? Mm-hmm.
But like Mark, I have also done a couple of shifts in an ambulance, and it's a wonderful experience. And one of the blessings of doing a shift is you do spend a lot of time waiting around. You take people to hospital and then you have to fill up a lot of forms. So you have the opportunity to talk to the paramedics, and they're always fascinated. Why you as a Christian? Why are you here? Why do you want to do this? So it's a wonderful opportunity to say that as a Christian we believe in standing with Israel, and we're here to support Israel. That's really a great blessing.
And Mark, you've encouraged me so much, both of you have, to the fact that we did a programme last year and the programme had such a response that our wonderful viewers responded in helping to finance and not pay for one ambulance but to pay for two, which is really, really special, and that touches my heart greatly. Now, how can our viewers support the work of MDA, and what role can you see for those working in the medical profession, such as doctors and nurses, can also support the work of MDA?
Right. I think the first thing I would say as a believer in prayer is that prayer is always the answer to that one, first and foremost. Because I think if we're praying and bringing ourselves into communion with the Lord, then we'll understand what his desires are. And from that, we'll learn what our response is. Certainly, I think any Christian in the NHS will understand, you know, that they're dealing with a person that God's created, and therefore I think in some ways they're better equipped to pray because they know what they're doing in terms of looking after, whereas, you know, people like me can only guess as laymen. But also inevitably there is the financial donation. We don't appeal for money, we never have done, and I think that's why CFMDA has been blessed by the Lord. But, you know, if people do feel led after prayer to give, then obviously we'd love them to do that because we're already working towards our next project.
And could I add that not everyone is able to give financially, but there are other creative ways of helping us. Maybe your viewers might like to suggest to their church leaders, perhaps part of their Christmas collection donation could come towards CFMDA. Also, we're always short of venues. If anyone has a venue, especially anyone in the London area that we could use, sometimes we have speakers and paramedics or other people coming over from Israel to talk about MDA, and we're always scratching around for a venue. That's another very practical way of helping us.
Absolutely.
Or extend as an invitation. I mean, I'm willing to travel anywhere. There are other people on the CFMDA executive who'll be more than happy to go speak to people.
This is something I've only just thought about as we're doing the programme, really. You know, what about a tour with an ambulance?
What, in this country?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to do that.
To go around to different churches with an ambulance. I would love to do that, but I'm
not sure practically how we'd get one across. But if anybody has any ideas on that one, please get in touch and I will happily lead that very
because that could create a little bit of a PR...
that's a very good idea. I like the sound of that.
Because my children will be so excited to have an Israeli ambulance on the front drive.
I can imagine. We have to make that happen, and I think that's important. But Bob, you said about the need to have venues and speaking venues. Now, there's lots of pro-regional Israel groups springing up across the country. Is there a way to work alongside these groups to get the work of Christian Friends of Magen, Adom known?
Yeah, what we find, and this is a big generalisation, but usually the sort of churches that have church buildings aren't necessarily on board for Israel. And it's more the free churches that support Israel, and they typically meet in a hired venue on a Sunday. So that's why we're always looking for venues. Now, there's some churches in London have said we can use their building, but they want to charge us £200 or £300. And we want to raise funds where we can, so we don't want to be paying for a venue. So it's a real great practical way of supporting us. If anyone knows, you can use this or you could use that, and then perhaps next time we have a speaker, we'll come along. And as Mark said, we're happy to travel anywhere.
Excellent. And Mark, for our viewers who are out in Israel, and many of our wonderful viewers love to visit Israel, I know I do personally, when they're in Israel, can they see the work of MDA?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, every tour that I take always goes to an MDA station, and we can easily arrange a visit to an MDA station without any problem at all. So please get in touch with us and we'll make that happen.
Absolutely.
And again, if people are on our mailing list, sometimes CFMDA, we do missions to Israel. People can come and join us. We'll show them a couple of ambulance stations, take them to the blood banks, go to some other biblical sites. Always a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is a great idea. But you know, Mark and also Barbara, can I share from my own heart? My wife's an occupational health nurse. My mother was a nurse practitioner, so I've had like a medical side to my family. So the fact is that also the Lord's placed a tremendous love of Israel and the Jewish people on my heart as well. Also means that it ties in the two, and that's why, you know, the dedication of nurses, the dedication of doctors to actually helping people that are sick or injured get well, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
And the fact you combine this with Israel and knowing that MDA is unlike any other, you know, medical service in the world, primarily because of the threats they have to deal with. Yeah. You know, if we look at the Second Intifada, for example, the horrendous suicide bombings that occurred almost on a daily basis in Israel, which was horrendous, and MDA were first on the scene, rocket and missile attacks, and yet also we see an organisation that incorporates Israelis and Arabs that really does a great deal for peace and reconciliation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing we need to add into that I'd not thought about earlier but is relevant is that often when MDA crews go out in such circumstances, they are then targeted themselves. So, for example, when there's a field hospital on the edge of Gaza, which often there is, because the Israelis give treatment, as people are brought to be looked after, the paramedics and ambulance drivers are fired on by the Gaza militants. There's a story of one lady who gave birth, a Gazan lady, and the paramedic delivered the baby under bulletproof vest to take care of that Gazan woman. And when she'd finished, instead of saying thank you, as I did to our midwives, she turned around and she said, "I hope my son grows up to murder you," and walked off. And I think really when we think of that extra pressure that their lives are at risk, and I do know from one or two stations near the Gaza border that they have snipers from Gaza watching for the ambulances to go out, and yet they're still willing to do that.
Absolutely. And there is a contrast between the likes of Israel and Hamas would actually deliberately use ambulances to transfer one Hamas terrorist to one place to another and actually abuse the goodwill of the ambulance service, isn't it?
Absolutely. Conversely, in Judaism, life is sacred. And with MDA, there's another aspect where the Bible tells us that life is in the blood. And all through the Bible is the theme of the covenant, the blood covenant. And so MDA, being Israel's organiser of blood supplies, it fits very well with the kind of Bible study.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for being my guests on the Middle East Report today. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. I am a big fan of the work of Christian Friends of Magen and Adom because they're making a difference in Israel and they're showing Israelis the love that Christians have for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel. So I'll leave you with this beautiful song that looks at the incredible work being carried out by Christian Friends of Magen and Adom.